Good morning, colleagues. We should be starting shortly. We're just waiting to see if we can get more colleagues to join. Maybe another 2-3 minutes. Good morning once again, colleagues. My name is Simbasi Banda. I'm going to be your facilitator this morning. And I think we're going to get the meeting started. Just thought I should share the program that we have. We're going to start shortly with welcome remarks from the FANAPAN CEO. But Dr. Chilidzi is unfortunately not able to be with us today. So Mr. Ian Mashingaidze will do the remarks in his place. We will then hear from Prof. Hetty from University of Pretoria, who is going to also make welcome remarks. Pretoria, of course, is the principal in this project. And she will also give us an overview of the CaBFoodS-Africa project. We will then move on to the main presentation, which is a presentation on the study and lessons on the nutrition sensitivity of food and nutrition policies, strategies, and programs in the three country case studies, that is Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. So the question is, what lessons can we draw from that, especially for the rest of Africa? We will then move on to have an open discussion session where we'll open up to question and answer and comments and interventions from the plenary. And we're hoping that Francis Hane, my colleague, who is currently on mission, will be able to join. He's been facing challenges. If not, I'll be providing that session at the end. So those are our sessions for this morning. I will stop sharing and invite Mr. Ian Mashingaidze to deliver the FANAPAN CEO welcome remarks. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Simbasi Banda, for the introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Standing in the big shoes of the Chief Executive Officer as well as Head of Mission of FANAPAN, allow me to start by acknowledging the CaBFood project's partnerships. Under the leadership of the African Research Universities Alliance, we call them ARUA for short, they have a Center of Excellence in Sustainable Food Systems. The CaBFood-Africa project is being implemented by the following partners. Firstly, the University of Pretoria. Secondly, the University of Ghana, Legon. Thirdly, the University of Nairobi. Fourthly, Forum, as well as FANAPAN as an organization of this consortium. I'm sure we all agree that our food systems are dysfunctional, and this is evidenced by the high rates of food insecurity as well as malnutrition that we've witnessed across the continent. As well as to say that climate change and variability are putting a heavy pressure on an already challenged system. This, together with other emerging shocks, such as COVID-19 pandemic, as well as global and regional conflicts, are exacerbating this situation by disrupting production and supply chains across the continent. And also to say that our food and nutrition security policies, strategies, and programs, they should all respond to these challenges to be able to deliver a food and nutrition secure, as well as a climate resilient African continent. In view of this, it is important that such frameworks incorporate nutrition sensitive options along the food system value chain, rather than just focusing on production as well as economic issues. This study that we are going to be presented with today, it provides an opportunity for us all to introspect, as well as to ask the hard questions about the state of our food and nutrition frameworks on the continent, which form the basis of our responses to one of the major problems of our time that we are facing. The main question to reflect on is to what extent our food and nutrition security policies, strategies, and programs fit for purpose against this scenario that I've painted. And to answer this question, we need to examine the framework documents, in the three study countries that we focused on through this research. These were Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. We need to examine these frameworks in terms of the dimensions of food security, food and nutrition security within the system's perspective, which looks at the availability of food, the accessibility of that food, as well as the utilization of the food, and also the sustainability, stability, and governance issues that surround that. We have a keen interest in not only how these frameworks are addressing these dimensions, but we are equally focusing on how they tackle the issues of gender, women empowerment, as well as youth engagement. The gaps in the various priority areas will inform policy revision, policy practice, as well as further research that will need to be conducted. If you look at FANAPAN, our approach to doing its mandate, our mandate across the African continent is anchored on a three-pronged approach. Firstly, we do policy research and analysis to generate and provide evidence. Secondly, we do policy advocacy and engagement using that policy evidence that would have been generated. And thirdly, we strengthen the capacity to be able for stakeholders to be able to use that evidence that we would have generated through the research. Recent experience has shown the importance of strengthening capacity of our stakeholders, both state and non-state actors, to be able to effectively implement policies and programs. We believe the study has surfaced capacity issues amongst other gaps that need to be addressed. Without preempting the presentation of findings to be covered later, the number of frameworks that were reviewed as part of this study is indicative of a proliferation of policies and strategies. This raises the question of how these frameworks are harmonized and should indeed be harmonized. Whilst the study used the three countries that I've mentioned as cases, we believe they are generating lessons for the rest of the African continent. Against this background and with these remarks, Mr. Chairman, I wish the presenters and all the participants a successful roundtable. I also want to urge everyone to feel free to contribute in order to enrich this study, as well as to be able to help us to build follow-up actions that will need to be pursued. With these remarks, Mr. Chairman, I would like to welcome everyone to this dialogue and wish you all a good discussion. Thank you very much. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thanks for those words. We're going to move ahead with the program, and also would like to welcome Professor Hetty Schoenfeld, who is going to give us welcome remarks from the University of Pretoria, as well as give us an overview on the CaBFoodS project, which sponsored these studies. Prof. Hetty, welcome.
Thank you very much, Simba.
We can run this from our end or from your end, whichever you prefer.
I would prefer if you can run it from your end.
Okay, please, Kanto, if you can load the Prof. Hetty's presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And I can just say that we have really enjoyed this collaborative project with Varenpan. And I would like to just give you a brief overview of our Center of Excellence in Sustainable Food Systems, called ARUA. ARUA is an African Research University Alliance of 16 top universities in Africa, and I would like to acknowledge both Professor Lindiwe Mayele Sibanda, who's our director, and Professor Frans Swanepoel, who's our co-director. Next slide, thank you. So our vision is to harness partnerships in research and innovation to drive agricultural and food systems transformation to ensure sustainable food security and nutrition in Africa. The purpose is focused on capacity building, research, visibility networking, and stakeholder engagement, such as we are doing today. Next slide. So we have 5 transdisciplinary research focal areas, of which the first one is improving Africa's herd. The second one is unleashing the potential of Africa's crops. The third one is safe, nutritious, consumer-driven food. The fourth one is evidence-led food policy. And the last one is climate-smart food systems that has recently been added. Next slide. So CaBFoodS-Africa, which is one of the 2 flagship projects under the ARUA SFS flag program, is on capacity building for food security in South Africa. And once again, I would like to acknowledge Professor Sibanda and then Dr. Beulah Pretorius as well. And then our partners in this project is the University of Nairobi and the University of Ghana. Next slide. So during this project, we have the purpose was intellectual exchange and capacity building in Africa, and also postgraduate training to talented students, sharing academic resources across university. And we have 5 themes, with the first theme focusing on short courses, where we build capacity in food security by presenting short courses both in South Africa, online during COVID, but also then in Kenya. We also did on theme B, we look at retaining nutrient quality through complementary interventions, and that research is also almost coming to an end. The third theme was on big data science through the lens of agriculture and food systems to build much needed skills. And we partnered with the SRI conference here, where we hosted for 5 consecutive days, an hour and a half discussing themes around big data, science, and agriculture. And then theme D is on policies for optimal nutrition sensitive options. And the last one is the high-level colloquium on ending hunger. Next slide. So for today, this is where we have joined hands with Farrenpan, is to look at what policies we can, available or can be put in place for optimal nutrition sensitive options. Thank you. Our highlights is that we have collaborative agreements, not only with the University of Nairobi and Ghana, which is our partners, but also Farrenpan and the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy that assisted us in executing some of the research. And we have 10 researchers currently conducting research in the three focal countries. But at the current time, we've got 115 participants from 11 countries that we trained to date. We also hosted a safeguarding seminar with 8 presenters from the University of Pretoria and the University of Ghana. And a total of 55 participants took part in that safeguarding seminar, representing 8 countries and 13 institutions. Next slide. So I think it's one thing that we've really learned, that if we together we can really make a difference and have a much better impact than by working in silos. And I leave you with that thought. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to the presentations today.
Thank you very much, Prof. Hetty, for that overview on the CaBFood project, as well as the Arua Center of Excellence. We will now move on to the presentation on the 3 studies. Some of you will be aware that this will be the 4th roundtable that we have had. The first 3 were basically looking at the individual country studies, that is from Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. Today, we are basically looking at a synthesis of this, but also focusing mostly on similarities across the 3 countries, but more importantly, what lessons can we draw from this for the rest of Africa? So without further ado, I'm going to ask Ms. Pamela Mjoma-Mchinguri to give us this presentation. We also have colleagues that participated in the country studies, that is Dr. Alice Murage and Dr. Phyllis, who are going to be supporting, especially when we get to the Q&A part of the presentation. So Pamela, please, if you can go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Pamela Mjoma, and today I'm going to take you through the findings from a study that we conducted on policies for optimal nutrition sensitive options, lessons learned from a study of food and nutrition security policies, strategies, and programs in Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so I'll start by looking at the global picture. Approximately 2.37 billion people experience food insecurity. That includes moderate and severe food insecurity in 2021. This is according to the latest SOFI report that came out in 2022. And what is concerning is that food insecurity has been on the increase, like the poor are becoming more and more poorer. And women are more affected regarding food insecurity compared to the men counterparts. And that is like 31.9% compared to 27.6% men. Again, women are also experiencing high levels of anemia, women of reproductive ages who are between 15 to 49 years, and this has been an increase from 493 million in 2000 to 570.8 million in 2019. This is one of the indicators that most countries have been battling with globally. And also we are seeing a rise in overweight in both children and in adults. However, I think the increase is much higher in adults as compared to children, where we've got 8.7% adults increase to 13.7, as compared to children who had 5.4% in 2000 to 5.7% in 2020. On a positive note, we've seen stunting rates declining globally from 31%, about 31% in 2000 to 22% in 2020. However, this is still quite a problem that many countries are battling with. Next slide. Okay. So looking at the sub-Saharan Africa, we are battling with the triple burden of malnutrition, just like the global picture, where we are having undernutrition, overnutrition, as well as micronutrient deficiencies. And when we are looking at our agricultural sector, which is responsible mostly for the food that we are eating, we are seeing that the focus has been mostly on productivity and economic outcomes, with little attention to nutrition. And this has resulted in our diets being non-diverse, mostly starchy foods with little or no animal source foods. And this has been, this is also contributing to the results that we are seeing. For example, we still have a high burden of food insecurity in the region, where we've got about 2/3 of people experiencing moderate and severe food insecurity. Although our stunting is also slightly decreased, it's still a huge burden for our region, where we are having 32.3% being stunted according to the 2020 report. And then looking at overweight in children, we are also seeing, we've seen an increase from 2012 until 2020. We saw an increase from 3.8 to 4%. And also we are having a high number of obesity cases in adults 18+ years, which is about almost close to 10%. And again, anemia is also quite high, with 40.7% in women of reproductive age. Next slide. Okay, so given this context and background, and also in addition to what the previous presenters have spoken about, there was a study that was conducted to look at the specific nature and range of policies and related strategies to improve nutrition through food and agriculture, with a lens on women and youth. This also looked at the key knowledge gaps in relationship between food and agricultural systems and nutrition, and looked at specific aspects of the agriculture and food system and its potential impact on nutrition. So of course, we're trying to identify and describe policies in agriculture that have an impact on nutrients of concern. So for example, iron, which we are battling with, which is resulting in the anemia, looking at the zinc and vitamin A, which also have been traditional micronutrient problems in different countries. We also looked at the applied language and technology regarding food and nutrition security with a gender and youth lens. And also we looked at information and knowledge needs and gaps that should be addressed through further study, and suggest potential processes for monitoring and evaluation. In addition to this, the objective of the study was to strengthen policymakers on nutrient-sensitive policy options through roundtable discussions for the countries that we did the study in. Next slide. Okay, so the approach that we took was to conduct the research in the 3 countries that are Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. And the first step was to do a desk review of the policies, strategies, and plans through an online search on the websites of the government departments, and also through engagement with the employees of the government departments, to just find out that we had the recent policies and the relevant policy, strategies, and plans that they were using at the moment. We also looked, when we identified the policies, strategies, and plans, we analyzed these documents using a checklist that we developed using the FAO guiding principles for nutrient-sensitive agriculture, as well as taking into account the 4 dimensions of food security, which were availability, accessibility, utilization, and stability or sustainability. Following the desk review, we conducted key informant interviews. These were representatives from government and development partners. And the main purpose for this was to sort of like triangulate our findings from the desk review, and also see how this policy is being turned into practice, like how the implementation is going. After gathering all these findings, country and regional reports were compiled, and we convened regional webinars in each country, as already previously mentioned. Next slide, please. Okay, so in total, we looked at about 47 documents across the 3 countries, and the documents included the food and nutrition security policies, the school health policies, the NCD policies, etc. Can we go in, and also the investment plans for the countries that had those in place. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. So regarding the country roundtable webinars that were convened in the 3 countries, there was a total attendance of 156 participants, where we had 72 in Ghana, 35 in Kenya, and 44 in South Africa. These were coming from different sectors. For example, the government, university, research organizations, civil society, and private sector, and also in development partners, include amongst others. These participants were presented with and discussed the strengths, gaps, and implementation status and challenges of food and nutrition security frameworks in the 3 countries, based on the assessments that were done on the desk review and key informant interviews. These roundtables were rich and provided ideas on how to improve food and nutrition security policies, strategies, and programs, and their implementation. Next slide. Okay. We're looking at our findings. Sorry, I think I hear some noise in the background. I'm not sure. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so looking at food availability, we looked at priority areas as defined by FAO, nutrient sensitive agriculture, and some of the priority areas that we're looking at were facilitated, whether the policies facilitated increased and sustainable production of diversified nutrient-dense crops. So this includes the livestock, the fisheries, the legumes, and basically also the animal source foods, as opposed to the traditional vegetables and fruits. But of course, those are also part of the nutrient dense crops. However, we noticed that maybe in most cases, the fruits and vegetables were more favorable as more favorably promoted, as opposed to the livestock and the other animal source foods. And we also looked at maintaining and improving the natural resource base, where we're looking at the strategies in place to preserve or improve the soil, the water, strategies about climate change, mitigation strategies, and also greenhouse gas emissions. So those are some of the elements that we're looking at. And regarding improving processing, storage, and preservation of food, we were looking at issues like the processing, for example, agro-processing, issues of storage, issues of post-harvest losses, the preservation of food, and etc. And then at food safety, we're also looking at whether the policies are supporting food safety issues. They are looking at the global recommendations on food safety. Are they recognizing that throughout the food production process? And we also looked at women and youth engagement. So we see that I think one of the areas that all the 3 countries were struggling with was the issue of women and youth engagement, where, of course, maybe the resources like land, credit, and inputs are mostly targeted at smallholder farmers in general, and not necessarily focusing on women and youth. And even when there are enterprises in place like SMMEs for agro-processing, they are just talking at SMMEs in general, but not being sensitive to women and youth in terms of providing those incentives or those resources for food production. And again, I think the improvement of natural resources was also a bit of a challenge for the different countries. But I think in general, the Ghana policies tried to address most of the components on food availability as compared to Kenya and South Africa. Next slide. Okay, so just in summary on the strengths and the weaknesses of the policies for all the 3 countries, one of the strengths in the 3 countries is that they promote home gardens and traditional crops, which is quite good that there's increased food production. However, the issue of diversity was sometimes lacking, which is why maybe there's some, when we're looking at the scoreboard, some of them were lower because maybe they're just traditionally promoting vegetables and fruits, but not necessarily the other foods and even the traditional foods like amadumbe, and yeah, some of the traditional foods were not really integrated. And then They promoted access to inputs, credit, and land in general, although we did note a gap of women and youth empowerment regarding that provision of inputs. We also saw a strength in the promotion of water harvesting and irrigation and recycling for increased production. And then the main gaps that we noted in these countries included the promotion of urban and peri-urban agriculture. It was not well promoted because most of the resources were allocated for rural agriculture as opposed to peri-urban, where we also experience high levels of food insecurity. Again, actions to maintain or improve natural resource base were also limited, and issues on climate change and greenhouse gas emission reduction were not adequately covered. Yet we are also battling with climate change currently regarding our food security and also nutrition outcomes. And in addition to that, there were more, we had a challenge with more explicit linkages with nutrition outcomes that are needed. Like, for example, we'd see that the focus is mostly on production and economic value and not exactly on the nutrition outcomes. So this was one of the gaps. And again, women and youth empowerment, as previously mentioned. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are the lessons learned? There were some good lessons we learned from the different countries. So for example, in Ghana and South Africa, they promote the drought-resistant maize as one of the issues to deal with climate issues. And again, in Ghana and Kenya, they were also promoting organic farming, which also helps to improve and maintain the natural resource base. And the GSGDA in Ghana also emphasizes the need to incentivize growers to adopt less exploitative and non-degrading practices in agriculture, again, as a way of improving and maintaining the natural resource base. And in South Africa, the policy also supports or proposes taxation on change of agricultural land use, and the funds are collected to keep in a trust for promoting agricultural production activities. So we see that I think currently most of the land is now utilized for other things, maybe housing, mining, and so forth. And it's good that actually South Africa put in place a taxation on changes to that land that is meant for agriculture. And then as a precaution against shortages and price shocks, in Kenya, they previously had a strategic grain reserve, but they now promote a strategic food reserve, because the grain reserve was mostly with cereal products, but now they are looking at a more diverse basket, which has got other cereals, fruits, vegetables, and other nutritious foods. And they also encourage renting of excess storage by private companies. This helps to ensure that food is stored and helps to prevent even the food seasonalities. Again, in Ghana, they do have a gender action plan, which facilitates access of women to traditionally male-dominated commodities, such as maize, soybean, and sorghum, and access to related inputs, processes, and value chain development. Again, to engage the youth, they've got the Youth Action Plan, which facilitates access to youth-oriented farmer-based organization, financing, and value chain activities. So these are some of the ways of strengthening some of the challenges that we identified earlier, but borrowing from different country lessons. Next slide, please. Okay, so regarding food access, we looked at issue of expanding markets and market access for vulnerable groups, women empowerment, and protecting the poor, as well as targeting vulnerable populations to improve equity. So we know that food access is important. We might have food that is available, but if the markets are not close to the people, whether it's actually the actual markets being set up, the infrastructure, the distance to get the food, we see that it compromises in data diversity, which is important as a nutrition, as being nutrition sensitive. And I think most of the countries try to incorporate this. And can we go to the next slide? Okay, so in general, the strengths and the weaknesses regarding the food access included the following. The positives are that there are social safety nets in place in all the three countries, where which are in the form of food parcels, vouchers, cash transfers, and school feeding. And as we know, school feeding has also been is now mostly homegrown school feeding, which is integrated and creates a market for the smallholder farmers, where the smallholder farmers produce food for the schools, and even it creates employment for the opportunity for the community. So in addition to providing meals for the vulnerable, it's also creating employment or income, and also promoting food production. And we also see that there was a general promotion on improved market infrastructure, such as roads. And as mentioned before, the road and the infrastructure is important for people to be able to access markets and be able to buy diverse foods, which they might not be able to grow themselves in their backyards. And then there's also a creation of opportunities for income generation. So for example, market access for farmers to sell produce. This was also well recognized in the policies for the different countries. However, when it came to the gaps, there's a challenge regarding increasing tax on unhealthy foods and lowering tax on healthy foods. So maybe you find that maybe sometimes the unhealthy foods, the fast foods, they're cheaper and more accessible, and yet the healthy and nutritious foods maybe is quite expensive, and some people are not able to afford those foods. Again, I think the policies were quite silent on labor and time-saving technologies to allow women more free time. And again, involvement of men in inter-household food access was also a gap. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are some lessons learned regarding food access. The South African Food and Nutrition Security Policy has got a strategy where they were promoting the establishment of government-led food storage facilities, especially in remote areas not easily accessed due to poor road and market infrastructure. So this again is helping those people in the difficult to reach areas to have access to food closer to them. And then again, the Zero Hunger proposes, which is also South African based, it proposes raising a minimum wage across all sectors. This helps to, they're proposing to improve equity among poor households, and also it helps affordability to the foods when people have got more income. As we know that I think the greater proportion also of most people's income is also sort of allocated to food. Then the NFNSP and the NDP, also South African based, advocate for more women and youth in agriculture and women, smallholder and youth farmers to be supported through employment and participation in local agricultural value chains. And then in Ghana, the school food policy advocates for gender equity and employment opportunities in the school feeding program. They advocate for participation of women alongside men in decision-making level, and involving more men in planning and capacity building in nutrition education alongside women. So these are some of the strategies that are in place to ensure that women are participating equally as men in accessing food as part of food security. Again, the Ghana, which is called the Ghana Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty Program, targets poor households with pregnant women and infants under 12 months of age with cash transfers, health services to help alleviate household poverty and improve nutritional status of infants. So what is good about this program? An evaluation of this program reported positive outcomes of women empowerment, including participation in community groups, social support, and nutrition knowledge. Next slide, please. Okay, and then regarding food utilization, yes, we've talked about food being available. We might have our diversified food available. Then there's food access. We've got our income to purchase the food. We've got our markets. But if our consumers are not educated, are not empowered to know the right foods to buy, sometimes we do not see results. So with food utilization, we're looking at how nutrition education is being promoted. We're also looking at the interventions, the traditional ones that we know, like infant and young child feeding, which includes exclusive breastfeeding and complementary feeding promotion, looking at adolescent-friendly nutrition interventions, promotion of micronutrient-rich foods, as well as micronutrient supplementation and access to safe water as part of food utilization. So again, I think across all the three countries, this was something that was very well done. And however, the challenge comes to women and youth initiatives. And I think in general, it's more of a challenge in youth rather than women, because I think most of the interventions are targeted maybe at mothers and children when it's nutrition education, but they do not really focus on adolescents. Next slide. Okay, so in general on the findings, we see that education is being promoted, and data diversity was being promoted, and also WASH was being promoted. However, when it came to the gaps, we see that the focus is on supplementation instead of promoting consumption of micronutrient-rich or fortified foods. So, of course, we see that there's promotion of vitamin A supplementation, iron, folic, and iron supplementation, and also folic acid supplementation. However, there was a gap in the policies in actually linking or promoting nutrient-rich foods and linking it to prevention of micronutrient deficiencies. In addition to that, we see that WASH, yes, we are talking about it being promoted. However, on the actual activities to be implemented, it was not actually included. So it's like promote WASH activities, but when it comes to the implementation plan, it was most often forgotten. Again, there's also minimal emphasis on adolescent nutrition. As mentioned before, that maybe sometimes when we do have women being targeted, it's mostly through mother and child nutrition education, but not necessarily looking at adolescents or their nutrition needs. Again, there's lack of male involvement in maternal and child nutrition, like the role of men. I think we've noted in other studies that women, if we target only women but without involving the men actually do have a contribution to improving maternal and child nutrition. So be it supporting exclusive breastfeeding, if the father is in support of that, then in the household, the child is also going to be most likely breastfed as well. And if they also appreciate the importance of eating a diversified diet, they can also allocate some income towards by purchasing nutritious foods. Next slide, please. So here are some lessons learned regarding food utilization. So for example, the Ghana NCD policy targets food vendors and caterers for education on healthy cooking practices. This is quite important, as we know, for maybe especially for pre-COVID, where we had most people going to work, would be buying maybe lunch from the food vendors, even for the caterers. But if these food providers are not educated on the appropriate cooking practices, then we see that maybe they are reusing the fat that they've been using since morning. So at least this Ghana food policy recognizes the need to educate these people and inform them of the correct or healthier cooking practices to ensure that we are safer as consumers. And then the Kenya looks at some of the initiatives proposed in the workplace. I think this is one also area that has been lacking generally regarding nutrition promotion. So they look at assessing the nutrition situation of the workforce, sensitizing businesses on different models, including simple healthy food or snacks for providing nutritious foods at the workplace, and the investment case for healthy food at work. So in a way, it also is including these vendors and caterers who are providing our food in the workplaces. Again, on the workplace support on health, it looks at setting up lactation rooms, childcare facilities, and also even disseminating material on breastfeeding. These are some of the initiatives that Kenya is trying to put in place through their policy. And we talked about adolescents being neglected, a neglected population, but at least in South Africa, we see the South African health policy is actually being conscious about this and promotes anemia screening in girls, school-going girls. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, and then regarding food stability, we looked quite at a lot of priority areas, which include multi-sectoral approach, the availability of incentives for food production that is diverse and nutritious. We looked at monitoring dietary consumption patterns, like the monitoring of food prices and etc., and also looking at capacity building, the implementation of policies and strategies, and also the nutrition, food and security objectives and indicators being included in these policy frameworks, as well as women and youth. So I think the three countries did very well when looking at multi-sectoral approach. However, I think there was a challenge where we do not actually see advocacy on an increased budget for nutrition. And they did mention the involvement of private sector and other non-state actors in general. And however, the issue of incentives for production of nutrition diverse foods was quite limited in the 3 countries, and is an area that we noted to need improvement, as well as also the monitoring. Of course, we do have the monitoring of food prices, but the real-time monitoring of some of the indicators was a challenge in the different countries. And then looking at capacity building, this was also addressed in the 3 countries, of course, Ghana being on the lead with that capacity building. And then implementation plans were generally included as part of the policies. However, the specific goals and maybe indicators for nutrition were quite limited in the 3 countries, as well as women and youth engagement. Next slide. Okay, so just in summary on the 3 countries, we see that the policy development was consultative and multi-sectoral, and also private sector and non-state engagement was also well acknowledged by the policies, as well as capacity building to ensure stability of food supply. We also see that most of the policies, strategies and programs stated their funding sources, which was primarily the government, and of course followed by NGOs and the development partners, and in some cases they gave an indicative budget. However, we noted that as the challenges, there was inadequate funding. So how is this when we do have the budgeting, and how is it that we are also having inadequate funding? In some cases, it was highlighted that maybe these budgets are overzealous in a way, like they overstate the amounts that they are going to use for each program, and yet on the ground, they actually don't have those funds. And then, so we would see that inadequate funding was also quite a huge problem in all the 3 countries. And the recent COVID-19 pandemic also further strained the resources that were limited. And again, we saw that when there is inadequate funding, sectors also tended to prioritize their own mandate instead of also integrating the nutrition. That was one of the issues we're also noting even from the key informant interviews. And another issue was that the cascading of policies from national to provincial and district levels is inadequate. So these policies in most of the cases are well embraced at national level, but when it comes to national and district levels, sometimes there's poor alignment or there's less embracement of these policies. And then women and youth indicators are mostly missing in the frameworks, as well as consumer participation is almost non-existent, where we are having mostly a top-down approach, where it's coming from the policy development is mostly at high level with very little participation of the consumers who are the beneficiaries of actually these policies that are being developed. Again, indicators on outcome and outputs are deficient. So for example, data diversity, I think the main focus is looking at the impact at stunting, wasting, but these are indicators that actually contribute to that are not collected or prioritized in most of the policy results frameworks. And then lack of incentives for production of diverse and nutritious food. This was especially in the case of Kenya and South Africa when we did the analysis. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are some of the key lessons learned? One of the good practices that we noted to improve coordination and accountability is having a national leadership and governments for food and nutrition security. For example, the South Africa case where they're setting up a food and nutrition council. So when we're having, for example, the key informant interviews, they were talking about currently the government is reporting to the government. I think their food and nutrition security policy is being reported to the DPME, which is government also. So it's like government sectors reporting to government. So they were appreciating the presence of a food and nutrition council because it's including different partners and sectors, which means the government will now also start to be accountable because this is an external part. It's not actually just government reporting to government. So this was one lesson learned to improve coordination and accountability. And again, in the South African case, to ensure harmonization and restricting the development of parallel policies, the DPME, which is the Department for Monitoring, is also putting measures in place where they restrict the development of policies that are parallel. So, for example, when the food and shame policy was being improved, they, instead of it being under the Department of Agriculture, they encouraged the multi-sectoral approach where they involved different sectors, they invited different sectors in the planning and the decision making, and that's how they've come up with an integrated food and share security policy. So as opposed to having each sector having parallel policies, each one always wanting to do something that is different from the other, but not working collaboratively. And then regarding private sector engagement, Ghana has got some examples of how they include the private sector, because as mentioned before, we had policies mentioning that they will include the private sector, but without elaborating how. So at least with Ghana, we saw some of the good examples. For example, the private sector is to be engaged to support social protection interventions through infrastructure development, employment schemes, and financial aid. So their roles are already spelled out in these policies. And again, the private sector is involved in the GODPS, particularly through financial institutions to provide credit for livestock production, marketing, and processing by providing them with financial incentives. And another example is the use of fiscal and economic policy measures to promote private sector investment. Next slide, please. Okay, so in summary, we see that this study provided a snapshot of the policies, strategies, and plans in Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. And in all three countries there, we've seen some good strides in developing these policies and frameworks. However, there are some gaps, which include the fact that agriculture productive resources are allocated to rural areas, yet food insecurity is also prevalent in urban areas, especially in formal settlements. Again, there is limited data monitoring integrated systems to ensure different actors and sectors effectively participate in the governance of food and nutrition security. Again, although we talk of multi-sectoral collaboration, which is evident in most policies, there still exists vertical programming with most sectors prioritizing their own goals rather than nutrition outcomes. So we can have agriculture still prioritizing agricultural goals and less focus on nutrition. And of course, we did say sometimes it's because of lack of budgeting or funds. And then we also see most policies, strategies, and plans and programs suffer from lack of adequate funding for successful implementation. And most of the frameworks do not have clearly articulated indicators for monitoring progress, especially for nutrition, gender, and youth. Next slide, please. And then the general lessons for sub-Saharan Africa, we see that policies that focus on production of energy-dense cereals with minimal focus on nutrient-dense foods can result in increased malnutrition, including overweight, obesity, and NCDs. And we can see in the three countries that these are common problems. And again, lack of women and youth empowerment further deters efforts to improve food and nutrition security. Again, poor accountability, there's poor accountability if indicators for nutrition, women, and youth are not included in monitoring frameworks. We know if it is not measured, then it is not done. And then there's inadequate funding. Inadequate funding compromises policy implementation. So even where there are efforts that have been made to craft nutrition-sensitive policies and strategies, if funding is not available, then it cannot be done. So again, strengthened leadership and governance are essential for successful implementation of food and nutrition policies. Next slide, please. And then here are some of the recommendations. Firstly, there's need to have a transformed food systems approach. We need to deliver on low cost and safe, nutritious foods. And then it's also important and critical that women and youth empowerment and general population are engaged. As we saw, this is quite a gap in most of the policies that we reviewed. There's also need to strengthen capacity for food system actors. So yes, we talk about integrating nutrition in education, in agriculture, etc. But if those sectors have got people who have got specialities in those areas, so we also need to strengthen capacity building, have the nutrition cadres showing or demonstrating how these sectors can be nutrition sensitive. So this capacity building is quite critical. And then there's need for one national leadership and government structure for coordination and monitoring. And there's need to provide incentives to promote production of diverse and nutritious foods. We need to have incentives in place where the smallholder farmers are actually encouraged or motivated to provide some of these foods that we are saying are important for nutrition outcomes. Next slide, please. Okay, so for future research, one thing is some of the issues that we need to look into for research include, for example, evidence-based implementation. So from policy to practice, what works? We saw on our analysis that in some cases, these policies are written very well. They're promoting, they're showing that they're nutrition sensitive. But when we come to the key informant interviews, we see that the implementation is a different story altogether. So maybe there's need for us to do some evidence-based implementation where we can actually translate these policies into practice. There's also need to research on funding sources, including private sector involvement. We see that even when the policies are being nutrient sensitive, one of the challenges for implementation is actually the issue of resources, which is mainly funding. And then we also need to research on how to empower women and youth for more meaningful participation in food and agricultural value chains, as well as research on basic set of indicators to deliver on the main food and nutrition outcomes in line with the capacity and resource limitations. And in addition to that, there's need to investigate the more effective incentives to improve nutrition outcomes and how to create functional public-private partnership arrangements. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pamela, for summarizing what was a very detailed study. Each of the country reports, in fact, are very rich. There's a lot more detail there than what we could cover in a short presentation. So thank you for that. So we've seen some good practices. We've also seen, I think every time you talk to people, they tell you that, oh, Africa is very good policies. But what we're noting here is that, yes, that may be the case in terms of what the pronouncements are saying in the documents. But when you come to implementation and also the details on how do you move from saying we're going to promote this to actually doing something practical that is measurable on the ground. So those are some of the challenges that we're noting. And everybody talks about gender sensitivity. And we all talk about the youth dividend. And yet, again, we see that when it comes to translating this into policy and practice, we are still found lacking. And again, we see a huge gap in the sense that when we talk about governance of food systems, it's very much top down. It's more about asking the various players to comply with regulations as opposed to taking their inputs into how the food system should be governed, how consumers can have a say on what food is marketed, what food is produced, and our preferences, to what extent are they taken care of? And so we see challenges with obesity. Is this lack of knowledge on what is good to eat, or is it because that's the only thing that's provided on the market, so one doesn't have too much choice, especially when the food also happens to be quite expensive? I can tell you from personal experience that even when you know what to eat, it's actually quite expensive to eat well. In other words, to eat proper and nutritious food. So yeah, these are the challenges that we're grappling with. So I'm going to open up to the plenary, to everyone to come in. Just indicate if you go to the reactions button on the extreme right on your platform, you can raise your hand. And so we'll start off with Liz Ogutu. If you can, please go ahead, Liz.
Thank you, Simba, and thank you so much, Dr. Pamela, for that very quite intense presentation that was really articulate on what you have found in your research work. I'm very excited to see that sort of research is ongoing. My name is Liz Ogutu. I work for Harvest Plus based in Nairobi. I'm the policy and advocacy specialist for Harvest Plus. What we do is we work on biofortification, which is nutrient enrichment of staple crops. And on the continent, the African continent specifically, we have quite a number of countries that are promoting, consuming, growing biofortified crops. I don't want to go to the details of what we do, so I'll just go straight to my question. Pamela, when you talked about the rate of stunting going down, is this just a percentage, or is it a percentage that also covers for the increase in population from 2020 to 2022? I think that would be interesting to know, because we may be patting ourselves on the back about the progress, but as a nominal number, it may be that there has been no reduction. So it would be interesting to find that out. The second question that I have is around when you were looking at nutrient dense, did you also look at nutrient enriched crops, which is obviously something that we're working on. And on the continent, we have 38 countries that are growing, consuming biofortified crops. So it would be good to know whether that is ongoing. The third issue, and I think this third question is really to Simba. Are you sharing these lessons, this knowledge to the technical working group of the CADA process? The reason I ask this, I belong to that technical working group. And I think one of the challenges we face is the quality of data that we are collecting on the continent. And I think some of this work would really benefit our colleagues in that technical working group. We need to make sure, when Pamela suggested doing some work on research indicators, the indicators are kind of there because of the CADA process. And so how can we enrich these indicators and collect them? And, you know, people like yourselves, Fanrapan, and members of this research group should ideally be part of that technical working group. I thank you. Those are my three questions.
Yes, thank you, Liz. Let's take maybe one more question, because those were three questions, so we don't want to accumulate too many of them. So let's maybe have one other person come in, and then we can give Pamela an opportunity to respond, and I can also respond on the specific question that Liz directed it. Do we have anybody else who would like to come in? Okay, maybe we can ask Pamela to respond while people are thinking of it, and also feel free to put questions on the chat box as we proceed. Thank you. Pamela, please, you can go ahead and look at the first question, which was on the rate of stunting. Is this just percentages, or are we talking of absolute terms? What exactly is happening?
Thank you, Prof. Okay, yes, this is based on the percentages that are presented as way of tracking from 2000 to 2016 and some up to 2020. However, I think based on the experience and working in different countries in the sub-Saharan Africa, we know that there have been efforts that have been made to reduce stunting. For example, we are seeing that definitely countries are integrating nutrition-sensitive activities. Before, of course, we used to see that nutrition was trying to address nutrition problems on their own, but we've seen improvements in how different sectors have come together to address the issue of stunting. We have not done I think the improvement has not been done according to how the projections or how the efforts were supposed to be, but definitely the efforts are in place that have contributed to the reduction of stunting. And of course, these are percentage numbers from the reports, but it's evident that the interventions that have been put in place since that time have definitely contributed to the reduction. And it's just not an issue of numbers. I don't know if that addresses your question.
Thank you, Pamela. It does.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I think we've got interventions that have even improved, like exclusive breastfeeding, complementary feeding. Yes, of course, we've battled with issues like data diversity, but we still see improvements in different countries. So definitely people have taken up these interventions and they've been doing great work in different countries, which is contributing to these results. And then the issue of biofortified crops being promoted in the countries. Yes, we did see that some of the policies were promoting biofortified crops, but I think in general, this was a gap. Because I think, of course, some of the countries are promoting the yellow maize, where some of the nutrients that are included in the crops include the vitamin A. And I think some are even going to the extent of promoting the enrichment of the soil where the crops are being grown in practice. However, in the policy documents, it was not well elaborated, and sometimes it was just a statement of intent where they just say biofortified crops, or maybe they acknowledge it in the situation analysis, but to actually talk about the actions that will support the biofortification of crops was actually limited. It was inadequate in the 3 countries. I don't know if Phyllis or Alice would like to add to that, but based on the on my review from the different 3 countries, these were the findings, that it was quite a challenge. And thank you for raising that. I think it's something that needs to be put on the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Pamela.
Okay.
Phyllis, I don't know, do you want to add anything on the biofortification story?
Yeah, so during the key informant interview, I realized like Pamela mentioned, that they are trying to enrich potato, rice, sometimes maize cereals with vitamin A, vitamin C. So I actually didn't see too much of that in the policy review, but during the key informant interview, it came up as part of the Ministry of Agriculture's efforts. So I think it's something that's new and is being worked on.
Okay, so that's an example of practice happening before policy, then policy kind of catches up. So,
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, as most things, you find that the formalization of some of these things is not that quick enough, and it's good that this is already happening. So maybe, Liz, that might give you some solace, but I think the policy side is probably not up to date in some of those cases. Before
Thank you,
I move
Simba.
on,
So
yes.
just to inform my colleagues, both Phyllis and Pamela, thank you so much. As part of the CADA process, CADA people, and I hope everybody understands, this is the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, which is part of the African Union sort of monitoring process. As part of the CADA process, towards the end of this year, we will be having a special meeting to talk about biofortification, specifically because a continental declaration has been made about biofortification and fortification. So I may want to reach out to Pamela and Phyllis and any other member of this group to see what we can learn, what we can share, the engagement that's going on as regards to policy. Thank you, Simba.
Yes, thank you, Liz, for that information. We'll definitely be looking out for that. Yes, your question that you raised on the technical working group on CADA processes. Yes, we've been involved in a number of these CADA, Malabo sort of biennial review, reporting and tracking the 7 commitments on the Malabo Declaration. And even currently, we have 2 of our colleagues attending a meeting in Cameroon this week. But I think we will be quite happy to share this. And in fact, I think it's necessary that we share this with the group so that they can connect the dots. We see that Africa in general is not doing well. There's only 1 out of all the countries in Africa which is on track to meeting the Malabo commitments by 2025. So which means that almost every country is not really doing well across the board. And food and nutrition security is one of those key areas where the continent is not doing well. And some of the reasons I think are coming out in that, yes, we have policies, and these policies, of course, need to be responding to the Malabo commitments as well as the SDGs. But when it comes to the actual domestication of the global as well as regional frameworks, we see a big gap there, especially in resourcing, countries basically not putting their money where their mouth is. And we see that some countries would say, yes, we've allocated this amount of budget, but there's also a big gap between allocation and the actual, disbursement to issues that are related to food and nutrition security. So a lot of these policies end up being, yes, good documents to look at, but we also note that when it comes to anything related to the actual implementation on the ground, there's a huge gap. So we really need to, in terms of follow-on activities, we need to be promoting more the implementation, the tracking, and try to see how we can build capacities of the different players to actually deliver on these frameworks, which most countries have signed up to, but sadly, the evidence on the ground says otherwise. So thanks, Liz, for that. We will be happy to keep in touch and see how we can collaborate to move this agenda forward. So let me move on to Prof. Hetty to come in. I see your hand, Prof. Please go ahead.
Yes, I just want to reiterate what Simba is saying, that we would really like to share this information as widely as possible. And you may be interested also, we are also doing a food basket survey in the 3 countries and looking at the affordability of food. And that might be something, that is now taking place in parallel to this process that Farnpan is doing. And that might also be very interesting to the CADP Technical Committee, because it will be all fresh and new data. And I will also like to put that on the table, that if you think that can contribute to the conversation, then sure, we would like to participate. And Simba will tell you that our funders really want this information to be used in Africa, for Africa, to the betterment of all. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for confirming that position, and also good to know that you are looking at the food basket survey, because that also speaks to the issue of affordability of nutritious diets. And it's one of the key things that I think to some extent, I would say governments are not tackling enough, because it's one thing to talk of, when countries talk of food security, in most cases, it's really about calories and making sure that there's enough staple like cereals, but you hardly hear people talk of, the other things that go into the diet. And one of the things maybe that didn't quite come out was the lesson from Kenya, where they've moved from strategic grain reserve, which was largely cereals, to a strategic food reserve facility where they actually expanding the food that is being reserved for emergencies to include not just cereals, but also to include things like legumes, fruit, vegetables, and other things that we know to be a necessary part of a nutritious diet. So do we have any other comments, colleagues? Any other intervention?
No, I see on the chat that Jabule.
Sorry, I forgot to look at the chat. Thanks for that.
Okay, he made a comment, and I think we have a serious problem of youth preference of fast foods than foods rich in micronutrients. Some do not eat vegetables at all. And I don't know if you want to comment a little bit more on that, because I totally agree, vegetables and fruits.
Yes. Would you like me to comment, to give a response, or do you want to explain further?
No, I thought that the person that posted that, we could perhaps elaborate a little bit more on that, and Pamela, then you can respond if you want.
Yes, sure.
Yes, Jabulile, if you feel like expounding on that point, if not, then we can just respond to what you put in the chat. Would you like to say some more on that one?
Thank you, Chair. It was just a comment on
Yes.
the maybe the obesity of maybe people in some of the Southern African countries. You find that most of the youth, they prefer the fast foods as compared to foods that are rich in micronutrients, like maybe vegetables and legumes. You find that they don't prefer those meals. It was just a comment to add that maybe, I don't know if in policy development is there anything that we can do about that? Because that's where the problem starts, because you move to obesity from maybe the diet that you consume at your early stages of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Jabulile. I think there are three opportunities that we can see or that we can highlight on to address this issue. So firstly, the issue of school feeding. In some school feeding policies, they actually talk about nutrition education. And I think maybe that needs to be harnessed on and ensure that it is actually happening. It's not just a statement of intent, but it's actually happening, that they are educated on what is a nutritious diets and they are promoted nutrient foods as opposed to fast foods. And I think even issues of some school feeding programs even have like a tuck shop program. I think in South Africa, they do have like a tuck shop guideline where they actually restrict maybe the access of these fast foods in the schools where most of these adolescents are spending their time. So I think that is one area that can be covered. And then there's another issue of, I think the example that we talked about for Ghana, where they've got the NCD policy talking about even training the vendors where or the caterers that actually make food, that these adolescents are purchasing food. So if they also try to practice some of the healthier cooking practices, then maybe it can also help to lessen the risk of overweight and obesity. And again, the issue of tax, which is lacking in different countries on the tax that is imposed on fast foods, and also incentivizing or promoting the more nutritious foods. So I think, okay, one example is South Africa also, where I think, one of the examples that most countries are taking up is the issue of the sugar tax. So for example, putting tax on sugar sweetened beverages so that it's not much cheaper, although I think we still see people consuming those sweetened beverages. But if more tax can be imposed on ultra processed foods, which include the fast foods, then it can also discourage such behaviors in our adolescents or the school-going age groups or the youth. So I think those are the three main issues that we can sort of like ride on to try and address this problem. And I think also the issue of maybe involving them in agriculture, where they're also involved in maybe doing gardening and appreciating the value of vegetables, which is coupled with education. I think those are some of the issues that can be included to address this problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pamela. I see a comment from Liz Kosten that they have a healthy eating drive on campus and are creating awareness around eating fresh produce at University of Pretoria. I think that's, that's good to know. We'll be happy to hear more of that, Liz, if you are prepared to share. And then Liz also says to researchers, you may want to read and compare your research with the Tanzania. This is, I think this is what, the multi-sectoral nutrition something released earlier this year. They seem to have done well on their nutrition and food security policy. School feeding education is ongoing. Also, Niger is doing well. So, yeah. Do we have anybody who wants to comment on this problem of youth? Maybe even adults. I guess it's not just youth. It's some of this food is really addictive, isn't it? It tastes well. It fills your hunger quickly, and but we know that it's not really, good for us. Does anybody else want to comment on this, Prophet? Any comments on, besides what Pamela covered in response to Jabulile's comment on, the youth preference for fast food? But I would say maybe more than just
comment on that as well. Yes, it's really true that the fast food, the fact that it is so popular is because it's very affordable, and people don't realize that very quickly something that used to be a treat becomes a daily habit, and by and consuming too many kilojoules every day leads to overweight and obesity, and that leads to our non-communicable diseases such as diabetes. And we know that diabetes in particular is exploding across our continent, and it is because people are eating too much energy-rich foods. So we did bring in the sugar tax in South Africa, but it's not enough. But for us, as nutritionists, it is important that we not just only tax people on what is wrong, but we should also educate them so that the funding should not go into the fiscal pool for anything. It should go back into educating the consumer about why is there a sugar tax and why should we look at energy intake every day. And we even see in peri-urban areas that there's a fast food outlet almost on every block of the main road. So it's very accessible to be able to access these foods.
Thank you, Prof. So we see, I think you touched on the key point about, fast food. It's affordable, and people find it easy to access as well. Yeah, it's affordable, but also it's also very available. Yeah, you
And
walk down the
convenient,
street,
yes.
and there are several outlets there, and one could argue that it's quite difficult to find the same sort of number of shops selling wholesome and nutritious food. So and also the promotion. I mean, you just need to switch on your television and see how the fast food sector, if I can call it that, promotes their products. So it's in your eyes all the time. Whereas you don't see the same level of promotion when it comes to, to wholesome food. Pamela Macholo, you want to come in?
Yes, Prof, thank you. No, I wanted to say I've conducted a study for my master's assessing the relationship between fast food and obesity. So like most of my participants, they were saying that they were consuming fast food because fast food is cheap and it's filling, and that in terms of their weight, they were aware that they were obese, but it did not bother them. So I think more training is needed for them to be educated about the health implication of consuming fast food. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Pamela, for that. Edward, your hand is up.
Thank you very much. I'm from Sierra Leone, and I have been enjoying very much this the discussion, and I think this is very similar to situations that we have in Sierra Leone. But one of the issues also we find out in Sierra Leone in working in the food security system okay, where I'm from, Sierra Leone Alliance Against Hunger Malnutrition. And so we deal with, we work with both climate change, we work in climate change, food security, as well as nutrition also. So, but what we have also realized in Sierra Leone is that in rural communities, they have a lot of fruits and vegetables. But what is really the problem is that they don't have value for the local foods around them. Instead of valuing those local foods, what they do is to go and buy adulterated food for their children in shops. So what is also of importance is that how do we also get the rural communities? Because for most of the workshop that we hold, we are just bringing the elites in those communities, but those very people that are really affected by hunger and malnutrition are in the communities where nobody may not even likely call them to a meeting, except when we go there in the communities and have meetings with them and talk to them in their local languages. So they have a lot of food in their communities. You go there and see a lot of vegetables, you see a lot of fruits, like pears, but say they allow those pears to rot under the trees and they don't eat it. So what is really of importance, like we have been doing, is to see how we can do some education on valuing local foods in their communities. They will leave the potatoes and all the things and go and buy flowers, nutritional flowers, or other baby foods in the shop. Okay, so what we are trying to do is to see how all of us can put together our attention to make them have value for the foods that they have in the community, and that also includes also nutrition education. Somebody was talking about, because most of the time they don't know how the various forms of preparing those foods. Like for example, cassava. You can make a cassava food. After 6 months, you can begin to give those food to your children. But what we are saying is that they leave all those ones. They have chickens, they have small ruminants in their communities, but they keep them for strangers. So what we are trying to do is to how we can also educate them, so that if they have small ruminants in their communities, if they have chickens, they have the eggs, and they can keep that and ensure that they feed their children. And the other thing also we have also noticed is that even educated women give the best of their food to their men, while the children get very small amount, or even the fish or the protein they cook, a very small amount is given to the children, while the men get the best of it all. So we need a lot of nutrition education that somebody was talking about, and I think it is also very much necessary to look around that and see how we can work with real communities, local communities, illiterate communities in their rural areas, and see how we can educate them on the foods that they have in their community. Not that they don't have the food, they have, but they don't know, one, how to prepare it in various forms. Like cassava, they may only know how to prepare it one or two. There are several forms of preparing cassava that will be also very palatable and attractive to them. So one of the things we also we are working on are some of those things. So but I enjoy the work, the meeting that we had, and all what has been spoken. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Edward. Thank you for those comments. You're bringing up quite a number of issues there. Yeah, the issue about the communities not valuing what the food that they have, and actually preferring to be purchasing not so nutritious food from the shops. We know that the supermarket culture is actually developing all over the place, and it's become a big challenge. Yeah, it's a blessing in some ways, but it's also a big challenge in that it's really challenging the traditional ways of looking at food. But even those traditional ways, as you rightfully say, the way the food is prepared in some cases is done in such a way that you lose all the nutrients. So education, yes, but I think we've heard so much about this education, but there's also the issue of the cultural issues at household level, intra-household food allocation, the patriarchy and the fact that men get all the best food in the household when they're probably the least needy. I don't know whether, how do we tackle these kind of things? Do we have any comment from the House, or maybe Pamela, Phyllis, you may want to come in there. I know that in one study that we did in Ethiopia, where we looked at the involvement of men in things that were related to the nutrition of women and children, where you had men that were more knowledgeable about nutrition, the indicators actually improved. You had better, better sort of dietary diversity among women and children, where men were actually more knowledgeable about nutrition. So it's important to involve men. So I see Liz wants to come in. I don't know whether you want to comment on this specific issue.
Yes, Simba, and I'm really glad to hear Edward's plea to all of us here in terms of making sure that we involve the right kind of partners to do the work locally to advocate. So advocacy is really, really important in implementing some of these policy programs and strategies. So involving CSOs and NGOs are quite important. Public health extension colleagues working in areas around clinics. So that's one way in which we have managed to change attitudes about the nutrient-enriched staple crops that we promote for consumption. So we work with public health colleagues, as well as community-based organizations on the ground to educate rural people on consuming nutritious crops. And we don't just do it for biofortified crops, we do it nutrition generally, because we have a lot of nutritionists in our program. So it's really, really important that we work with the right kind of partners to get that message out. Because as you said earlier, Simba, some of the policies are behind us in terms of the policies are not in place, but we know there's a problem. So we have to make sure that we're educating citizens and populations on nutritious issues. So we need to make sure, what Edward has said is really, really important in making sure that this knowledge is put in place. And we also produce recipe books. So we have recipe books for various biofortified crops. And I think these recipe books can be done for all sorts of nutritious foods, because that is the gold standard for improving nutrition, people eating good foods. So if there's recipes for the different cassava, like Edward has explained, recipes for even indigenous foods. Some of the countries, like in Southern Africa, there's things like mopane worms. People eat a lot of things, but sometimes they also associate it with poverty, and that's not correct, because it's not really a poor man's, nutritious foods are not poor man's foods. So there's a lot of behavior change work that also needs to take place. And I know Simba Fandrapan has been doing a lot of work around advocacy and behavior change. So obviously you guys can lead us in helping to communicate better with the population. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. Phyllis, do you want to add some more comments onto these issues related to food choices, utilization, social norms, which may also be barriers to what we are trying to achieve?
Yeah. So I wanted to make a comment about what David submitted. I used to work in Sierra Leone with an NGO as well, and we worked in nutrition and health. And one of the things we used to do in the rural communities was cooking demonstrations and using the backyard gardens. So the idea is to train these women to grow these nutrient-dense crops, and then you would go in there and also go ahead and do cooking demonstrations with what they are growing, so that there's a sense of appreciation for what they are doing. And then they also get to learn how to use it. And then when there's any leftover, the idea is they can then sell it because the community knows it's nutrient dense. And then they would be able to also make money, which they can use to buy maybe like meat or other animal proteins to sort of supplement their diet. So that's one way I know which actually works. And also for male involvement, another thing we used to do was to have these support groups, male support groups. So the men used to come together and then would actually teach them about nutrition and how they'd be able to support maternal and child nutrition as well, which actually turned out to be one of our good programs, because at the end, the men became much more interested in supporting maternal and child nutrition, which eventually would affect the household nutrition. So I just wanted to give those examples.
Okay, thank you for that, Phyllis. So yeah, I liked what I'm picking up from Liz's comments and also what Phyllis has just said is yes, we're talking advocacy, but in most cases, as Fanapan, we've probably been guilty of advocating probably to the, wrong audience, so to speak, because change is actually going to have to happen at the community level. And that's where you see those numbers, even the stunting numbers coming down. And what Phyllis has just shared also on the practical sort of, field-based work with communities, because that's where things happen. So we obviously need to relook at all this. Yes, which partners are we working with? Who is on the ground? Yes, it's all good to talk to central government officials and all these guys. Yes, they do the policies, but when it comes to really enablement of the communities, you probably want to look elsewhere for that. But also, I'm a firm believer on, especially now that we've got all these technological tools to communicate and send the message out, we actually don't have any excuse. So how can we channel more resources into the appropriate communication, well-targeted, and to see that we actually have, simple, straightforward indicators that we can track to see what is actually happening at community level. So those are really, critical sort of things we need to look at. One of the challenges that I also have, which I believe some countries are doing better than others, is, Liz, you mentioned participation of public health officials, extension. Now, agriculture extension in most countries in Africa happens to have the widest reach when it comes to community engagement. And yet, the focus has largely been on increasing production of key either crops or livestock, but not so much having them account for nutrition outcomes as part of their work and responsibilities. I don't know whether in your work through Harvest Plus, and especially on the biofortified crops and trying to promote this, to what extent has the message of nutrition been actually pushed through agriculture extension as opposed to public health officials? I know I'm targeting this at you, Liz, if you're still there. And anybody else, please feel free to come in. Let me hear from Pamela first, and then Liz, you can come in.
Okay, carry on.
Hi, Pamela.
Thank you. Okay, I think the issue of extension service workers is very important, and one of the examples that was given is the issue of having what are called nutrition advisors in South Africa, working side by side with extension officers so that they can sort of like build their capacity on how to produce diverse crops. And then they can also cascade the message to the household or the communities that they're supporting in food production. So I think that's one example that's being promoted in South Africa.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, Liz, you can go ahead.
Wonderful, Pamela. It's good to hear that. With our programs, what we do is we train the agriculture extension colleagues. So we do a lot of training. For example, just recently, I think we targeted about 300 extension officers in Zambia, where we trained them on nutrition and nutrition-sensitive agriculture.
Okay.
So this training includes, sort of agronomic practices, good agricultural practices, but we also include the nutrition side of things so they understand that this is an important aspect. And we will also ask them to sort of try and include things like the recipes, leaflets that they can share with the farmers that they talk to. We also train what we call lead farmers. So farmers who have shown that they are good in some of these practices, we train them because they are then able to train other farmers, because we find that it works really well when other farmers learn from their colleagues. So the people that we find in rural areas are not only producers, but they're also consumers. So they produce what they eat. And if actually one of the results that we found that was really surprising was when they change, let's just put an example of vitamin A maize. When they change from the normal maize to vitamin A maize, they keep most of the produce in the home rather than selling it. So they've actually appreciated the nutrition content of that. We have a lot of evidence. I can share with you a link where we have this evidence. So it's just that you have to target different people. And as you were saying, Simba, it's about the partnership that you have all in countries like in Tanzania, where they have this an MNAP program. You find that having a multi-sectoral nutrition policy helps than having different parts of different ministries trying to work with other ministries. So the nutrition work is under the office of the president, I think, or I can't remember who, but it gives it a higher level rather than the individual ministries. Perhaps I'm not explaining myself well, but maybe you understand. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thanks very much. Yeah. So that's very encouraging. But my main concern is we've got this what you are sort of highlighting as successful cases. Now the question for me would be, how do we make these sort of mainstream, so to speak? In other words, government needs to move in there as the driver of such things. Yes, they can bring in partners to support them, but the whole policy implementation side in terms of sustainability, I imagine that, Liz, you are working through projects, and by their nature, projects tend to be sort of, you have a limited life. And the question is, what happens when you move out? How do we build this sustainability? How do we make sure that these approaches are actually mainstreamed and included into regular budgets that are funded, whether it's from the public sector, but with their partners, but something that is sort of routinized, if you see what I'm trying to get at, as opposed to project-based. Other people, please feel free to come in if you have experiences to share on this, because we're really talking about lessons that came out of this study, but this roundtable also allows us to, to pick from other colleagues that are out in the trenches. So the question is, how do we make sure that this becomes the normal way of doing things and not so much project-based?
So, Simba, sorry to be the one who's always responding.
So it's okay.
It's
No
quite
problem.
embarrassing. You know what Pamela talked about as she was going through her presentation? There were things that I was looking for, which we have identified to be important in improving sustainability of the policies and the work around food and nutrition security. One of the most important one is public funding budgets. So the government allocates funding for activities on nutrition. And this, in some cases, is ring-fenced. And I gave the example of Tanzania. The Tanzania nutrition, multi-sectoral nutrition program has not only allocated budgets to nutrition-sensitive activities which cut across agriculture, health, and education in terms of school feeding, but it has also prepared what they call a resource mobilization business case, where they go as a government to look for resources that helps them to then implement that work. So that really helps to make it a government-owned process. So yes, definitely having policies is important for sustainability, but also having a budget that is allocated to that. That's really, really important. The other thing is making sure that it's not just a policy, but then there are programs that move from policy to programs so that the governments they take ownership of the processes. I think that's one of the things that Pamela also mentioned in her presentation. And I think it's important for us to make sure that we hand over some of these work to governments by making sure they buy into the project research outcomes. I'm going to stop there and let somebody else comment.
Yes, thank you, Lisa, for that detailed sort of explanation as to how you're approaching this. Do we have any other comments, colleagues? Please feel free to come through. The real issue here is how we translate policies to practice and really make it a way of doing business as opposed to be an exceptional case or sort of theory of change type of proof of concept.
Hello.
What you want to come in?
Yeah, Edward. Can I come in, please?
Hi, yes, go ahead, Edward.
Yeah, I have had very good comments from the speakers up there. One very serious issue also that is affecting food security is farmers' access to prices of their commodities. You know, most of the farmers are based in far remote areas, communities, and they are producing products for which they don't even know the prices in the big towns within. I'm saying that also because one, I'm also from a cocoa farmer, and one of the things that is affecting us is that most of the cocoa farmers, we are talking about food security, but I'm only bringing this example. We don't even know the cost, the world price market of cocoa. So therefore, it gives room to rogue business people to go in there and cheat the farmers, especially the rural farmers, those who are producing food crops. So for us in Sierra Leone, we have the food security meeting that is organized monthly by FAO, and they are collecting data on market prices of basic food items, and that information although there is limitation with regard to where it is going, because of the different languages and also the cost of the illiteracy level of the farmers. But they have developed that one. For every 3 months, they give out the prices of agricultural commodities. I think about 25, that is generally the major ones that they share. But even though that is happening, there are still gaps in terms of reaching the very, very rural communities. So that is one issue also I wanted to talk about. The other issue, somebody was talking about extension. Yeah, what I have also realized is that donors train extension. Most of the donors target their funding to train extension workers in agriculture. But in terms of real supporting their operations in the field, we see there is a gap there. Like for example, in Sierra Leone, we have 1 extension staff per chiefdom, and some chiefdoms are very, very big. You may go into some of those areas, the extension staff may not even have a bike, or even if it has a bike, the running costs is almost always not there. And if you don't go to the farm, to the farmers in their farms and give them the education they need, if you say it only in the radio and you say it only in the you don't go there. These are people that have traditional farming practices for years, and you want to change that traditional farming system that they have. So it needs really constant engagement, and there is a gap in there in terms of real extension staff going to the farmers in their farms, those native farmers in their rural communities. You see, because that is where really, if we are going to make an impact on food security, that is where the impact really is. For some of us who are in the big towns, we are eating well. There may be some bots in terms of eating more than we need, but the problem with regard to real hunger lies there. So we need also to look at that very seriously, that we don't only support extension staff in terms of training. How do we also support them in their operations at community level? The other issue also that is coming up strong is the issue of climate change and the changes in the weather patterns. One of the things we have also seen is that, like for example, in Sierra Leone, the rainy season used to come early in May, but now we see the rainy season coming sometimes from in March. So it has changed the real crop growing pattern of the farmers. But because the farmers don't have access to climate information, weather patterns information, so they have a lot of problems at community level. Sometimes when they plant, either the rainy season comes short, and then the plants are green while the rainy season cut off. And so we really have to look at also how do we, because we are not going to really achieve this food security issue until we also integrate climate change and climate change patterns into our operations. So we are also beginning to see that. I just want to make that short comment, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Very insightful comments. Let me just pick on one that you touched on, which is the issue of commodity prices, especially by rural communities. I think one of the key challenges that we noted was the lack of incentives for people to produce, nutritious food. So to some extent, that's linked with that. Are farmers being rewarded for doing this? Do they even know what they should be producing that will provide a market? Because the consumers are well informed about, the kind of food that they should be, eating, and therefore this sort of feeds back to the producers so they can produce some more of this, because they also know that they will be paid, well for this sort of thing. Market information, promotion of markets, it works both ways, the supply and demand side. So Pamela, do you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Prof. I wanted to comment specifically on the issue of lack of information for the farmers. And I was just trying to suggest the use of ICT technologies, like use of the technology, for example, having cell phones, to use SMSs or WhatsApp messages, because I think our rural communities are also becoming developed as compared to the previous years. I think one of the initiatives that I've seen in South Africa is the use of the Mom Connect, where the government sends bulk messages to mothers on the feeding or the developmental stages of their children during the infant and young child feeding, from the time that they are pregnant until the child is 2 years old. So I think that is one of the areas that I think needs to be strengthened in providing information for farmers where it's hard to reach and maybe where movements are restricted, like in the case of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. So I see we have a couple of comments here on the chat. One is from Moke Tabane from Lesotho, who says, thank you very much to the team. Very informative indeed, and relate very well as it is in the case of Lesotho. So I hope that the colleagues from different countries could identify with some of these things, but more importantly, identify possible strategies and approaches as to how we can move this food and nutrition, security issue forward. In the case of South Africa, we've got NMC monitoring food prices and also prices along the value chains to see, and also to advise government on where they are likely to be, price spikes. Prof. Hetty also mentioned that South Africa also monitors food process in South Africa. So there are many interventions, many approaches that are taking place, but in a lot of cases, we're not really harnessing this in a coordinated way to actually make impact. So all these good practices that have been shared this morning, and also coming out of the study, we need to ask ourselves, how can we make this the normal way of doing business, as opposed to these cases being exceptions. So I think I saw one other hand, maybe I didn't respond to. If there is another hand before I kind of bring the discussion sort of session to an end. Do we have anybody else who may have a burning issue to share, or a question, or just an intervention? Okay, so I think we had on the program sort of where do we go from here, and my colleague Francis Hale was supposed to actually give us his thoughts on this based on our discussions this morning and the presentation from Pamela and all the discussions. Unfortunately, he's on mission, and we've been discussing this the last couple of days as to how best to address this, but yeah, he doesn't have connectivity. So what I'm going to try and do here is really just to try and do a summary of the major issues that I've noted coming out of our discussions. But maybe before I do that, I'll probably also want to, I know, Prof. Hetty, I'm ambushing you here. I know that the CaBFoodS-Africa project is coming to an end, and also these are some of the activities that we sort of coming to as part of the conclusion of this project. I don't know if you want to say anything as to what next now that we've done this study. I know there are 5 thematic areas. Do you want to share anything with the group here, Prof?
Yes, I would like to invite you, in fact, that we have Arua SFS will be hosting 2 science days, one in Ghana, which is this Friday, and that will only be virtual, and then a hybrid one that will be held the week of, let me just get the date, it's the 3rd week of August. And you are welcome to attend those 2 days, or select from the program, whichever lectures you would like to attend. The first day will be more about the capacity, the grant that we received from the UKRI on training early career researchers. And then on the next day, the Thursday, the 25th of August, we will be presenting CaBFoodS close out, and there we will present everything that we did in the project. And in the afternoon, there will be a high-level colloquium. And there was such a vibrant participation this morning, whatever time of the day it is with you. But I would really like to extend the invitation to you. And what I will do is Simba, is that perhaps I can share with you that link, and then people can register on that link to whatever event they would like to participate in. I think that will give us good memento, and we are bringing out a special issue of Frontiers with the publications of the CaBFood projects in, and it very well may contain the 3-country report of Farenpan as well. So I think, you know, that is a real a tangible output from the 3-year project that we did.
Thank you so much, Prof. Yes, we will be happy to use our networks to communicate these events, 24th to 25th of August. So that's something that is, you know, worth looking forward to, colleagues. Now, just to get back to our roundtable this morning, I mean, a lot of, you know, nuggets that came out here. I know it's one of the things was, of course, the need to share the experiences, the findings from these studies with the whole CADA process. We know that the African Union and partners are obviously tracking the performance of the CADA process, the Malabo commitments. So, you know, these studies actually will inform some of those discussions. So definitely that's something we'll be happy to do. And yeah, the issue of promotion of you know, nutritious foods versus you know, the competition we have, say, from fast foods and others, we definitely need to improve our communication there, especially the advocacy side, and to choose our partners correctly to see how we can reach communities and different population groups to spread, you know, the message. I mean, the statistics are all there, but I think in most cases we're talking to or preaching to the converted. We tend to keep this very much among our circles. We talk about the negative impact of NCDs, which in most cases find their origins in what we eat. And yeah, upwards of what, 75% of global mortalities are related to food-related NCDs. So you can almost say that, yes, we, on the one hand, we have large populations that are food insecure and also getting mortalities there because they're not getting enough to eat. On the other extreme, we also have large chunks of our populations suffering from NCDs, and largely because we're not eating appropriate food and our lifestyles are not in sync, you know, with the health requirements. So it's critical that we find practical ways of tackling this. I like the idea of producing recipes, making it easy for people to prepare and consume nutritious foods, but also having cooking demonstrations at community level and making sure that, yeah, the role of men in this whole discussion. We talk about women empowerment, but there can be no women empowerment without the involvement of men. So we definitely need to engage the men in this whole, what is one of the worst or the most serious wicked problems of our time. Then the contribution of, agriculture and other extension services to this whole discussion needs to be accentuated. We need to see that extension play a more meaningful role in nutrition, not just promoting the traditional agriculture sort of outcomes like increased production, increased incomes, but we need to influence what happens to this production, what is produced, and what happens to the income that comes out of agriculture. How can this be utilized to, to purchase more nutritious food for such communities? And more importantly, the issue of funding, I think, is critical. The thing about government is that governments are always saying we have no money, but actually what is required is actually smart investment by government so that they can, if you like, leverage participation of the private sector and others to come in, because government has gone in and identified levers that they can put money on, which will actually deliver much more than the budget that they have. I mean, governments are the only ones that have access to the fiscus, which they can play around with. For instance, they don't necessarily need to give money. They can actually provide things like tax breaks, say to private sector that invests, let's for argument's sake, say in a project that is promoting nutritious food. They could give them tax breaks on equipment, on, maybe tell them that, yes, they can have 3, 4, 5 years of, zero income tax because they're investing something that is worthy to the community. So government is the only one that has this kind of flexibility. So we need to be looking at this in terms of case studies, research, so that we can also advise government that it's not always, real money that you need to push forward, but you can also use these various fiscal and economic measures that only government has access to drive the agenda forward. So these are some of the things that I picked up. We are also going to be preparing a publication in addition to what Prof. Hetty noted, which will try and summarize some of these findings and of course propose the way forward. The advocacy, I think this is a great sort of material that we can also use in our advocacy work going forward to try and influence policies, but also engage some more with the CADA process within Africa, within the various regional economic communities. So this is, in a way, there's quite a lot to look forward to. As you can see, there are so many questions. We still have so many things. We're not quite sure how to proceed. But more importantly, we need to be down on the ground. How can we be on the ground to make sure that we make a difference to communities, not just in rural areas, but also in the cities? We have communities in cities who actually are probably in some cases more food insecure because of unemployment, and food is expensive. Urban communities basically have to rely on purchased food. And if good food is expensive, nutritious food is expensive, then of course people are going to fall back on fast food, which comes out much cheaper, but we know how dangerous it is in the long term. So yes, otherwise I could talk all day on this, but ladies and gentlemen, this was a rich discussion we had this morning. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank our presenters, starting off with the representative of Fanapan CEO, Prof. Hetty. We appreciate the partnership with University of Pretoria and also Arua SFS. We believe that this is just the seed to start with, and we look forward to more collaboration. Also want to thank our colleagues from partners from Ghana, University of Ghana, Legon, as well as University of Nairobi, who supported us with mobilizing participants and also participation in the study in the 3 countries, and of course partners in South Africa who also participated in this. and to thank the consultants, starting off today with Pamela, who did the presentation, consolidating the lessons from the 3 countries. But Pamela was also responsible for doing the study on South Africa. And then we have Phyllis, who did the study for Ghana, and Alice, who did the study for Kenya. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your efforts. And I hope that this will plant the seed and take nutrition-sensitive options to a new level, because that's the solution. We know there are nutrition-specific sort of approaches, but they, on their own, they are not going to deliver, the goal that we're looking for. Otherwise, colleagues, thank you very much and appreciate your participation and your presence today. I would like to say that we can bring the meeting to a close unless there are any housekeeping or any last minute sort of parting shots. Please feel free. Otherwise, we are done for today. Thank you. If there's nothing else, I would like to say that our meeting has come to an end, and we shall meet, as Prophet said, there's the Science Days through the Arua SFS program, which will include special sessions on CaBFoodS on the 24th and 25th of April. We will be sending these notifications out in due course. Otherwise, good day and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Very much.
Simba.
Thank you.
Thank you, Van der Paan. Thank you, everyone, for your presentation.